She didn't hear the cheers, but she felt the silence. Everyone had someone except her. A deaf girl sat abandoned at her own graduation until a stranger signed something that broke her heart open. The sky above the stadium glittered with evening lights as families rushed in with balloons, bouquets, and banners. Laughter echoed everywhere. Students in navy blue gowns hugged their parents. Siblings screamed their names. Mothers wiped tears of pride. But in the middle of all that celebration sat Aisha Malik, hands folded in her lap, her face still and too calm for a girl who is supposed to be proud of her biggest day. She blinked slowly, watching the colorful chaos move around her like a silent movie. Aisha was deaf from birth, and she'd learned to find peace in silence. But today's silence felt different. It felt empty. Her classmates kept glancing toward the front row, where a name card read, "Reserved, Malik family." The seats were still empty. She checked her phone again, no message. No, running late. No, we're coming. Nothing. Just the same screen she'd stared at since the morning. Her father, CEO Zamir Malik, one of the most powerful businessmen in the city, wasn't coming. Neither were the stepmother and step-siblings who pretended to care only when cameras were around. Aisha forced her lips into a faint smile she didn't feel. She told herself she didn't need anyone. She told herself she was used to it. But the sting in her chest said otherwise. Meanwhile, near the back rows, a man hurried in with a little girl tugging at his sleeve. Armin, a single dad and a delivery driver, looked out of place among businessmen, socialites, and families dressed in designer clothes. His shirt was simple, his shoes worn, but he walked with a gentle confidence. His 8-year-old daughter, Mira, danced around him, trying to hold 2 juice boxes and a crumpled handmade card at once. "Baba, hurry. We'll miss the names," she insisted, almost tripping on her untied shoelaces. Armin bent down and tied them in one swift motion. "We won't miss anything. Promise." He wasn't here for a relative. He wasn't here for a friend. He was here because Mira begged him to come watch real graduates so she could feel what her own future might look like. As they walked toward the aisle, Mira suddenly tugged his sleeve. "Baba, look." Armin followed her gaze. And that's when he saw her. A girl sitting completely alone in the middle of the crowd, still, composed, almost invisible despite her beauty. No flowers. No family. No one sitting beside her. Just an empty row with perfect makeup, perfect posture, and heartbreak hiding beneath calm eyes. "She's sad," Mira whispered. "How do you know?" "A girl can tell," she replied with childish certainty. Armin smiled softly, but something in his chest tightened. He'd known that kind of loneliness once. He recognized the way her shoulders sank when she thought no one was looking. He recognized the way she clenched her hands to stop them from shaking. And then the announcer began calling names. Each graduate walked proudly to the stage as families screamed, clapped, and shouted with joy. When they finally reached Aisha Zamir Malik, the entire stadium went silent for a moment. Everyone expected the CEO's booming cheer, a camera crew, something grand. But nothing happened. Aisha stood, smoothed her gown, and walked toward the stage with her chin lifted in quiet dignity. No applause. No cheers. Not even a polite clap from her father's company employees who filled the VIP row. Just hollow silence. A girl in the row behind whispered, "Her dad didn't come again?" Another replied, "He never does. Poor thing." Aisha heard nothing, but she saw the pity in their faces. And that hurt more than the silence ever could. She accepted her diploma with a soft smile, posed for a picture with no one, and walked back to her seat as the crowd applauded for everyone else. Armin watched her the entire time. "Baba," Mira said, pulling his hand. "Someone should clap for her." He didn't hesitate. He stood and clapped, loud, firm, and without shame. Mira joined him, clapping with all the enthusiasm her tiny hands could manage. Aisha paused mid-step, startled by the sudden applause. She turned her head, saw a little girl cheering wildly, and for the first time that evening, her lips trembled into a real, gentle smile. But what happened next made her stop breathing. As she reached her row, Armin slowly raised both hands
and signed.
You did great. Her eyes widened. No one except her late mother had ever spoken to her in sign language with such sincerity. And in that single moment, surrounded by hundreds of people, it felt like someone finally saw her. Someone finally cared. Someone finally spoke her language. One signed sentence and her world shifted. Why did a stranger know the language her own father never tried to learn? Sometimes the people meant to love us don't show up, so destiny sends someone else. Aisha sat frozen, her diploma still clutched in her trembling hands. The stranger's sign echoed in her mind long after his fingers stilled. You did great. 3 simple words. But to her, they carried the warmth of voices she never heard and the comfort of hands she remembered from childhood, her mother's soft, graceful signing before illness took her away. Aisha blinked rapidly, trying to steady her breath. Why would a stranger sign to her? Why would he care? People looked at her and saw a Malik, rich, privileged, untouchable. They didn't see the loneliness, the abandonment, the years of being treated like an inconvenience by her father's flawless new family. But this man, this stranger, he looked at her and saw her. Not her last name, not her silence, just her. She opened her mouth, instinctively wanting to speak, then stopped. She didn't speak much. Spoken words felt foreign, heavy, unreliable. Instead, she lifted her own hand slowly and signed back. Thank you. Armin nodded with a gentle smile, then motioned his daughter forward. Mira scrambled down the row and popped up beside Aisha with a bright grin. She held out the crumpled, homemade card she'd been carrying. It's for you, she said aloud, even though she didn't know Aisha couldn't hear. Aisha looked confused, so Armin stepped closer and signed. She made it for the graduate she likes the most. Aisha's lip quivered. The graduate she likes the most? She didn't even know this child. She opened the card carefully. Inside, in crooked handwriting, Mira had written, You're the princess because you're alone but still strong. A tear slipped down Aisha's cheek before she could stop it. Not even her own family remembered her graduation, yet this little girl had tried to draw her a crown. A soft tapping on stage drew everyone's attention as the ceremony ended. Students began rushing out to find their loved ones, take pictures, pose with flowers, all things Aisha had no one for. She remained seated, her hands folded tightly, the card pressed against her chest like a fragile treasure. Armin noticed. He walked toward her, hesitant but sincere, Mira trotting beside him. He tapped lightly on the metal railing, so she could sense the vibration, and looked into her eyes before signing slowly. Are you waiting for someone? Aisha forced a tiny smile. Her hands moved with trained grace. No one is coming. The words hit Armin harder than he expected. He sat down beside her without asking permission. People stared. Why would a simple man sit beside the CEO's daughter? But Aisha didn't move away. She was too tired to care what anyone thought, and too grateful that anyone, was speaking to her. Armin signed again, gently. If you want, you can celebrate with us for a bit. Mira insists. Mira nodded strongly.
Yes.
Yes. We have juice. Aisha laughed silently, a sound that showed only in her eyes.
She signed.
You don't even know me. Armin replied. Sometimes we don't need to. Kindness doesn't need permission. Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not teachers. Not friends. Not relatives. And definitely not her father. Aisha took a slow breath, then typed something on her phone and turned the screen toward him. Why do you know sign language? Armin's expression softened, shadows passing briefly through his eyes. He took a moment before signing back. My wife, she couldn't speak in her last years. Signing was the only way we talked. Aisha's face softened. He continued. I promised her I'd never let the language die in our home. So, I teach it to Mira too. Beside him, Mira happily demonstrated the only phrase she'd mastered. You are strong. Her hands stumbled adorably through the signs, but Aisha understood, and it broke something open inside her. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. For years, She'd begged her father and stepmother to learn even the basics of sign language. For years, they told her, "You can read lips. That's enough. We're too busy for all that. Just speak like a normal person, Aisha." But here was a stranger, a simple man in worn shoes, speaking her mother's language as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And here was his little daughter, signing clumsily but trying because she wanted to make her smile. Aisha wiped her tears and signed. "I'd like to celebrate with you." Mira squealed in excitement. Armin smiled warmly. But before Aisha could stand, a sudden silence swept through the crowd. People parted, whispering. Cameras lifted. Security guards stepped aside. Aisha didn't hear the footsteps, but she saw the faces turning and stiffening. Then she saw him. Her father. CEO Zamir Malik. Expression cold. Eyes sharp. Face tight with humiliation. He had finally arrived.
And he was not happy.
Her father finally showed up, but not for her. He didn't come to congratulate her. He came to control the narrative. The single dad stood between a CEO and his daughter, and the truth shook the ground beneath them. The moment CEO Zamir Malik appeared, the air tightened like a fist closing. Aisha watched him stride through the stadium aisle like a man who owned not just businesses, but people. His suit was crisp, his face expressionless, and his eyes were locked on her with a coldness that made her stomach twist. Parents whispered. Students stared. Security hovered behind him, as if escorting royalty. But Aisha felt none of that pride. She only felt the same ache she'd carried for years. He hadn't come earlier. He hadn't clapped for her. He hadn't seen her walk across the stage. He'd arrived only when the cameras were packing up, when there was no risk of being seen as the father who didn't care. He wasn't here for her moment. He was here for his image. Zamir stopped in front of her, jaw tight. "Aisha," he said sharply. She didn't hear the voice, but she saw his lips, stiff with irritation, not affection. She slowly stood, clutching Myra's card in one hand. Armin rose beside her, protective without even noticing his own instinct. Zamir's eyes flicked to him with disdain, then lowered to Mira, whose tiny hand was still looped around Aisha's fingers. He didn't sign. He didn't smile. He didn't even look proud. Instead, he hissed, deliberately slow, so she could read his lips. "Why are you with them?" Aisha blinked, stunned by the accusation instead of a greeting. She signed back firmly. "They clapped for me." Zamir's eyes hardened. He responded aloud, louder this time, not caring if she understood every word. "Where is your family photo? The media is asking. We need to leave." She felt the words like a punch. He wasn't asking why she sat alone. He wasn't apologizing for being absent. He wasn't acknowledging her graduation. He needed her for a picture. A photo to make him look like a loving father. Armin stepped forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough that Zamir noticed someone was willing to stand near her. Zamir turned to him, sneering. "And who are you?" he demanded. Armin kept his voice calm. "Just someone who thought she deserved applause on her graduation." Zamir's nostrils flared. "And you think you were the one to give it?" Armin didn't flinch. "When no one else did," he said simply. A few nearby parents murmured under their breath. They had seen Aisha walk across the stage in silence. They knew the truth. Zamir narrowed his eyes. "This is a private family matter," he snapped. Aisha watched the exchange with rising anger tightening her chest. She signed sharply at her father. "Stop." But Zamir ignored the flutter of her hands, as he always did. He pointed at her. "You come with me. Right now." She shook her head. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but speaking slow enough for her to follow. "What do you think you're doing? Standing here with strangers? I raised you. I gave you everything." Those words hurt more than insults. Everything? He'd given her money, a house, education, but not love, not effort, not language. Aisha steadied her breath and signed, hands trembling but firm. "You didn't come. They did." Zamir's face twisted. Anger, embarrassment, ego. "I had business," he snapped. She signed again. "I was alone." His response was cold. You're old enough to manage loneliness. Armin's eyes darkened at that. He stepped forward one small pace, enough for Zamir to feel a shift. With respect, Armin said, voice steady, no child should feel alone on their graduation. Zamir's head jerked up. Did I ask for your opinion? No, Armin replied. But she deserves one person in her life who speaks up for her. Silence fell. Aisha stared at Armin, shocked. Not because of confrontation, but because someone finally defended her without hesitation. No one had ever done that. Not teachers. Not relatives. Not friends afraid of her father's power. But this man with worn shoes and a gentle voice. He stood his ground. Zamir's expression hardened into something dangerous. You're overstepping, he warned. Armin met his gaze. It's not overstepping to treat someone with basic kindness. Zamir turned to Aisha, fury simmering. His lips moved sharply. We are leaving. You will not embarrass me. Aisha's breath shook. Embarrass him? By what? Having someone care. She raised her hands in a sudden, fierce motion. I'm not leaving with you. Her father froze. Students nearby stopped walking. A few phones discreetly lifted. Zamir stepped forward, voice low but venomous. You ungrateful. But before the last word formed, Armin placed a gentle hand between them. Not touching Zamir, just a barrier of presence. Sir, he said calmly, you're speaking to her like she's a problem. She's not. She's your daughter. Zamir glared at him. You don't know anything about us. No, Armin said softly. But I know she deserves better than being spoken to like a burden. Aisha's breath caught. Her vision blurred. Someone was fighting for her. Someone was standing up against the man she'd never been able to confront alone. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel voiceless. She felt seen. But Zamir wasn't done. He straightened his jacket stiffly. If you walk away with them, he said, each word slow and cutting, don't come home tonight. Aisha felt the stadium tilt. The little card in her hand crinkled. Her pulse pounded. Then she lifted her chin and signed. Then I won't. She walked away from the father who never chose her. Sometimes leaving isn't rebellion, it's survival. The single dad didn't rescue her. He simply offered a place where she finally felt safe. Aisha didn't look back. The stadium lights blurred into streaks as tears filled her eyes, but her steps stayed steady, steady in a way she hadn't felt in years. The soundless world around her pulsed with her heartbeat, each thump like a reminder that she had just made a choice that couldn't be undone. Behind her, she saw her father's mouth move with fury. His hands tightened around his designer phone. His security guards exchanged confused looks. But he didn't chase her. He never had. Not when she was a child struggling to lip read. Not when she signed to him, begging him to learn her language. Not when she cried quietly in her room after his wedding to a woman who pretended her disability was a nuisance. He had never run after her before. Why would he start now? Aisha inhaled deeply, chest trembling, wiping tears on her graduation gown sleeve. Beside her, Armin walked with slow, deliberate steps, giving her space, not crowding her, not tugging her along. Mira skipped between them, holding Aisha's hand tightly, like she'd known her forever. They reached the edge of the stadium, where the noise of the world faded and the night wrapped around them like a softer, safer blanket. Aisha stopped walking. Her hands shook as she signed. I'm sorry.
You didn't have to help me.
Armin shook his head gently. He signed back, slower this time, so she could see each movement clearly. No one helped you. They should have. Her eyes stung again. Mira tugged her fingers and pointed at the glowing food truck across the parking lot. Baba, can we take her to get fries? Fries fix everything. Aisha didn't hear the words, but she understood the little girl's excited pointing and bright eyes. Armin smiled and translated. She wants to buy you fries. She says it will heal your heart. Aisha laughed, a silent, broken, beautiful laugh that made her shoulders shake. Healing.
She didn't know what that felt like.
But maybe, just maybe, she would tonight. They walked to the food truck, where warm air smelled of salt, spices, and fresh bread. People gathered under string lights, families laughing, couples sharing plates, children playing with balloons. Aisha's eyes softened. This was what she always watched from afar. Scenes she'd never been part of. Moments she thought she didn't deserve. Armin ordered for all three, Mira bouncing on her toes. They found a picnic bench under the lights. Aisha sat down carefully, as if afraid she didn't belong there. Mira plopped beside her and pushed a carton of steaming fries into her hands. "For the princess," she declared proudly. Armin interpreted. "She says these are the best fries in the world, and they're only for strong girls." Aisha blushed, lowering her head, but her eyes shone with gratitude. She took a fry, biting slowly, savoring the warmth spreading through her chest, not from the food, but from the feeling of being accepted without question. For the first time that day, she wasn't invisible. As they ate, Armin studied her carefully, but respectfully, without pity.
He signed.
"Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" Aisha paused. Her hands hovered uncertainly before responding. "I have a house, but not a home." Armin nodded with a soft, knowing ache in his eyes. He had known loneliness too, after losing his wife, after raising Mira alone, after working long hours while watching families walk together. He signed gently. "You don't have to decide anything now. But if you need a place to sit, rest, drink tea, our door is open." Mira quickly raised her hand.
Yes.
"Come to our house. Baba makes terrible tea, but I put sugar in it when he's not looking." Aisha laughed again. Her heart swelled painfully. She typed something on her phone and showed Armin. "Why are you so kind to me?" Armin took a slow breath. His gaze softened with memories that lived quietly in the corners of his eyes. He signed. "Because someone was once kind to me when I had no one." Aisha watched him, sensing the story behind his words, the grief, the strength, the years of surviving. He wasn't helping her out of pity. He was helping because he understood. She lifted her hands again, fingers trembling. "I don't want to be a burden." Armin shook his head firmly. "You're not. You're a person who needed someone to show up." Aisha's throat tightened. He continued. "And today you showed up for yourself. That was brave." Something inside her cracked, something she had held together for years with silence and forced smiles. Her tears spilled again, fast and uncontrollable. Mira leaned over and hugged her, small arms wrapping around her waist. "No crying. You're a princess. Princesses don't cry unless it's happy crying." Armin translated with a smile. Aisha hugged Mira back, burying her face in her soft hair. For a brief, fragile moment, she felt like she wasn't alone in the world. But deep in her chest, the fear returned. Her father was powerful. If he wanted to punish her, he could. If he wanted to cut her off, he would. She pulled back, fingers shaky, and signed. "He'll come after me." Armin's expression changed. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a quiet, steady resolve. He signed firmly. "Then he will find you surrounded by people who won't let him hurt you again." Aisha stared at him, stunned. No one had ever spoken to her with such certainty. No one had ever stood between her and the storm. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. She wasn't sure if she could truly walk away from the life she'd always known. But in that moment, under the warm lights, with fries cooling in her hands and a child hugging her tightly, she felt something she'd long forgotten. Hope. Her father tried to pull her back, but she wasn't the same girl he used to silence. The single dad didn't fight with fists, he fought with truth. Sometimes family isn't blood, it's the hands that reach for you when you're falling. Aisha sat on the small couch in Armin's living room, wrapped in a soft blanket Mira had insisted she take. The dim yellow lamp cast a warm glow, the kind she had never known in her own cold, polished mansion. There were toys scattered on the rug, a half-finished coloring book on the table, and the smell of tea steeping in the kitchen. Chaos, but gentle chaos. The kind that felt like life. Armin placed a steaming cup of tea in front of her. Too strong, too bitter, the way he always made it. Mira promptly sneaked over and dumped 2 spoonfuls of sugar inside. Perfect, Mira declared proudly. Aisha smiled, a full, genuine smile that made her face glow. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Then her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with dozens of alerts. 30 missed calls, father. 12 text messages, father. 4 messages, stepmother. 2 voicemail transcriptions. Her heart clenched. She turned the screen so Armin could read her father's furious texts. Come home immediately. You are humiliating me. If you don't return tonight, the consequences will be severe. The last message made her blood freeze. No one will hire you. You'll have nothing without me. Aisha's breath stuttered. He wasn't just shaming her, he was threatening her future. Her hands shook as she signed. Maybe I should go back, just to keep peace. Armin sat across from her, calm but firm. He leaned forward, so she could see every sign clearly. Peace for who? She blinked. Not for you, he continued. Just for him. He wants control, not peace. Her lips trembled. Mira, sensing the tension, crawled onto Aisha's lap and held her face with both tiny hands. You can stay with us, she said, slow and exaggerated, hoping Aisha could read her lips. We're your friends. Aisha hugged Mira, with shaking arms. Minutes later, loud knocking shattered the quiet.
Bang, bang, bang.
Armin and Aisha exchanged a knowing, sinking look. She already knew who it was. Armin opened the door calmly. In the doorway stood CEO Zamir Malik, face red with humiliation and rage, 2 bodyguards behind him. His expensive cologne filled the small entryway like poison. Where is she? He demanded. Armin didn't flinch. She's safe. Zamir stepped forward, voice sharp and condescending. I didn't ask your opinion. Bring my daughter out here now. Aisha rose slowly from the couch, stepping into view. Mira clung to her hand, but didn't hide. Zamir pointed at Aisha with an accusing finger. You come with me this instant, he ordered. His lips moved fast, sharply, each word dripping with anger. Aisha shook her head. Zamir's face darkened. I said now. Armin stepped between them, not threatening, simply a protective barrier. Sir, lower your voice. You're scaring her. Zamir glared at him. You think you're saving her? You're ruining her life. She lives in a mansion. You live in. He waved a dismissive hand around the modest home. This. Aisha winced. Armin didn't. He signed toward her, slow and steady. A big house means nothing if your heart is small inside it. She swallowed hard, tears gathering again. Zamir snapped. Stop that ridiculous hand waving. She can read lips. Armin's jaw tightened. No, he said quietly. You can't be bothered to learn her language. The bodyguards shifted uncomfortably. Even they knew that sting was true. Aisha stepped forward, pushing fear aside. Her hands moved with more strength than she'd ever shown her father. Why didn't you learn to speak to me? Zamir stiffened. She continued. You learned French for business. You learned golf for networking. But you never learned my language. Zamir opened his mouth, but no explanation came out. Aisha's tears finally fell. You didn't come to my graduation.
You didn't clap.
You didn't see me. Zamir's voice cracked, but not from guilt. From pride. You are my daughter. That should be enough. Aisha signed sharply. Being your daughter never made me feel loved. The words struck the room like thunder. Zamir's face paled. Armin bowed his head slightly, honoring the courage it took her to say that. Mira squeezed Aisha's hand tighter. Zamir exhaled in frustration, stepping closer. Aisha, listen to me. But she stepped back. And she signed, clearly, boldly. I choose myself. Zamir's breath caught. For the first time, he looked unsure. Aisha pointed to Mira and Armin. They showed up. You didn't. Silence. Then Zamir lowered his eyes, the fight draining from him. Not because he understood, but because he realized he'd lost control. He turned without another word. His bodyguards followed. The door closed behind them with a soft finality. Aisha collapsed onto the couch, shaking. Armin sat beside her, not touching, letting her choose. She turned, lifted her hands, and signed. Thank you for helping me find my voice. Armin shook his head gently. You always had a voice. You just finally stopped whispering. Mira jumped into Aisha's lap again. So now can we watch movies and eat more fries? She asked loudly. Aisha laughed, a soft, glowing laugh. She nodded, and for the first time in years she felt free. Not because she escaped her father, but because she stepped into a place where love wasn't measured in power, money, or control. Only in kindness. Only in being seen. Only in being understood. A family wasn't something she lost. It was something she finally found.